So on to, I guess, the main event of the evening, successful delivery and project management. So that's a rather, I guess, chunkier version of me when I used to work for the Berkeley Group on a project in Battersea and Nine Elms. This was a sort of 955 unit scheme, which was an 8-year program. Obviously, lots of infrastructure changes, a huge amount of work to deliver. So as you can imagine, they're sort of prepping for that site and putting everything in place to make the delivery of it as seamless as possible is hugely important. You know, this was just shy of a £1 billion GDV. So you've got a huge amount of build costs, huge amount of engineering works going in, huge amounts of people to manage on site. So I'm going to talk through essentially how I see successful delivery being instigated and what you should be putting in place for project management to be as seamless as it possibly can be. And there's so much that I could talk about here. I've tried to keep it relatively high level and just talk through the stages that people should be going through, whilst giving a few sort of tips along the way of things you should be thinking about. So we'll be looking at the detailed design and what I think should be included and involved in that process, various procurement routes and how they differ, and how depending on your certain circumstances and site, might lean you more towards one route than the other. We'll be talking about successful tender processes and what you should be doing to set that up for to get you as competitive a price as possible with the right contractor. The cheapest contractor is not always the best, and it often isn't the best. Looking at the different types of contract that you can use once you've found a contractor that you're happy with, how important programming can be, and looking ahead, looking at critical paths and how you should set your timelines up. And contract administration. So we'll get more into that soon, but it's often overlooked by a lot of developers. They should have an intermediary between themselves and the contractors, and I'll talk through that process. Once all the work is done and you've delivered the scheme, there'll be a period after that, which is sort of known most commonly as the sort of handover process. And that's equally as important to get snagging sorted out and make sure that you haven't got any latent defects that are going to cause you issues in the future. So, detailed design. This is obviously something that's close to my heart. I run an architecture practice. The technical detailing of things is something that I've always enjoyed and been very good at, hence why I was a technical manager for the Berkeley Group. I like getting into the detail of things, and we've got some nice graphs to show you in a minute, which I think are great. So, detailed design, what's involved in that? What does it look like? Well, most people will see that as drawings, and it absolutely is. I think the drawing package is probably one of the most important points of detailed design, but that alone won't be enough to get you a robust tender back from contractors. There's a lot more information that you're going to need to put into that package of information that you send out to tender, and things like the specification of works should accompany the drawings to really give more detail behind some of the drawing work. So you will have general arrangements with your drawings, you'll have typical sections, construction details, but actually a specification of works will give you that next level of information, next level of detail in terms of performance specification, exactly how things should be built, where your masonry wall ties should be placed, how far apart they should be, what levels of insulation you're going to need to hit the thermal requirements that you need. So the drawing and specification of works are the two sort of key things that you're going to need as part of your detailed design package. Taking it that next stage further, room data sheets are something that we produce when we're pulling together a full tender package, and this is really the nitty-gritty of items that often get overlooked. So actually, what does your ironmongery package look like? What type of handles are you putting on? What paint colors are going on the wall? Are there any special graphics that you're putting in? And all that level of detail that isn't necessarily construction information, but it's the finer finishes and fittings that soon add up when you start putting your tender together. Coupled with all of that, you're going to have to get third parties involved, and the structural engineer is probably one of the biggest and most important consultants that you're going to have to go to. So having a really decent package that's well coordinated, and that's one of the key things that you'll need to look out for when you're putting a detailed design package together. How well is your structural design coordinated with your architect's plans? I see it too often where they essentially work in separate entities. They're both off doing their own thing. You get the information back and the contractor's on site saying, well, your architect specified this and your engineer specified this, which one do we actually do? Huge mistake. Really, your architect should be driving the design, and your engineer is there to help facilitate and create what your architect wants to introduce. My background being an architectural engineer, I used to do all of the engineering in-house, so it gave me a very, very good insight into how well a well-detailed piece of building design can help facilitate speed on site and reduce your build costs. Because as the engineer, you can manipulate the beam sizes and the beam ratio and orientation to suit the architectural aesthetic. So if you've got a good understanding of both sides, you're going to be able to create things that are more buildable, quicker to install, which is often overlooked when you've got a wide gap between what the architect wants and what the engineer's designed. Another part of the detailed design package that you're going to need is a mechanical and electrical layout and plan and strategy. And I guess it depends on the size of the project that you're working on. But for me, no matter how big or small the project that you're working on, this is one of the biggest ambiguity points where contractors assume you just want a certain number of sockets or you want a pendant lighting, whereas actually in your head you want downlights throughout, you want Cat3 cables and coax cables behind your TVs, you want USB sockets next to your bedside cabinets, and all those finer details that the contractor hasn't assumed. So without this information, what you get back from your tender returns and what you've assumed you're getting are wildly different. So the more information you can give the contractors, the better tender return they're going to give you. And I've made a note here to say performance or full. When you get into sort of larger contracts and larger projects, and certainly when you've got design and build contracts, it may be that your architect is only specifying a performance specification of a product. So it may be that your gas boiler or your electric boiler needs to be 90% efficient, it needs to be SEDBUC rating of X, Y, and Z, or your U values of the windows need to be 1.4, for example. That's the performance specification of that element. Now, if you're going down a design and build contract, the contractor can basically come back to you with something that satisfies that performance criteria, and they're doing their job. That's fine. If you're going down the full plans, especially with mechanical and electrical, you're essentially asking a mechanical and electrical consultant to give you the exact product that you want to install. So it will no longer be a 90% efficient boiler, gas boiler. It will be, I want you to install a Worcester Bosch 30 kilowatt boiler with these fittings. And that's going to be, that could be more expensive, but that's the difference really between kind of specifying it as just performance only and having a full specification for that individual product.
I've actually had similar case to that. I've actually had it before when a builder's working on a house. They quote it and say, as per scope of works version 3. And then you ask them to do something, they say, well, I haven't priced for that. And you go, well, you priced according to this version and that's in it. So you just sort of bring them back to the document. So it sort of zaps that pain out of it of what's an extra and what's not. And there's going to be plenty when it comes to when it comes to these things.
Exactly, and that's the importance of all these drawings and documents. Is a reference point for everyone, so there's no ambiguity. And the other thing that is pulled into all of this detailed design package, you will have other third parties that need to influence the design. Energy assessors, being probably one of the biggest ones, because they're going to affect the thermal fabric of everything that you're doing, whether or not you've got renewable energies involved, PV panels and various other things. All of those consultants will need to feed into the drawings and the specification of work. So all of those things for me help create a really, really detailed tender package that you can send out to your contractors to get robust prices back. And this is one of the graphs that I pulled together, which is very crude, but it says what I need it to say. Essentially, the more amount of detail you put within your tender package, the less ambiguity the contractor will have, and the increased certainty of cost you will achieve. So the more detail you give, the less ambiguity, you're going to get more certainty of cost with your tender returns. The last thing you want to be doing is giving them a 2-page drawing drawn on the back of a fag packet with no specification of works. You're not going to have any certainty of what's actually going to be delivered. And it's going to be very painful for absolutely everyone involved in the process. So you've got the detailed tender package in a great place. You've got all of those things involved. So now, which route actually do you want to go down? And there are various different types of procurement method. I'm going to talk you through the 3 main ones, which are these.
Ben, before you dive into those 3, I think there's a good question here that we could go on to.
Okay.
Which is, what level of detail would you recommend to go to on a less significant development, e.g. a HMO conversion?
It's a fair comment. I get asked that all the time with my architecture practice, really. When you give a price for providing a certain level of information, and they just say, well, I just need building regulation drawings, or I don't need that level of detail. For me, you do. You're not going to need a room data sheet, or if you do have a room data sheet, it'll be very, very dumbed down, I guess. And we kind of have 2 different levels in that respect, where more often than not, we'll include some form of room data sheet within our construction spec. So it will just say bathroom, kitchen, bedrooms, and then it'll have line items for paint, flooring, ceiling, are there any dado rails or coving, etc. And it's enough to get a more of a robust price back from the contractor, but it's not going to the full detail of where you can source elements from, how much you expect them to cost, what the sort of finer level of detail. I would always recommend getting a mechanical and electrical layout. I think that for me is one of the biggest, when I've been on site overseeing things, a client walking into a room and saying, I didn't expect the light switch to be there, or the sockets aren't wide enough for my bed to fit in. Like, those things are so simple and they can easily be put on paper. That, I don't know, 2 hours that you get your architect to draw that up with is going to save you, hundreds of pounds on site. I guarantee it. So in short, a HMO conversion might not seem like it needs all of this information, and it doesn't, but you can provide a dumbed down version enough so that you're giving your contractor clarity on what you are envisaging, and later down the line, you're not running into trouble. Now, I've read a lot of sort of case studies in terms of how much things cost you on site when you have delays and you make changes and you have variations. You're basically going to be paying 4 or 5 times more on site if you make changes than you are if you just get it done on paper from the start, and you're well planned, and everything is clear for everyone. I can understand when people, sometimes there have to be changes, there are unforeseens, or the client just changes their mind. They don't want the TV in that location, they want the TV in that location. And in which case, to be honest, the owner should be paying for that. If they've changed their mind and that's not what's in the contract, then they should be paying for it. And as a contractor, that's also safety for them. Like it works both ways. When you've got a detailed package of information, there's clarity. And
good afternoon to you. Not too bad at all, thanks. Not too bad at all, thanks. Just got my head.
All right, it's not a question.
Fine. Just to interject there when it comes to HMOs, for our HMO portfolio, I do full scope of works, M&E schedule, painting schedule, door furniture schedule, flooring schedule. I said paint schedule, even a furniture schedule, because even though it feels like a lot of work, I don't know one HMO landlord that stops at one. So you're building a document that you just can keep using. And if you don't want to go to site once a week, make sure you do it well. There are things that you'd have to address because normally when you're converting, there's a lot more like on-site stuff that you have to deal with, like, you know, floor joists are going the opposite way. So how do you run the downlighters the way that you wanted to, and things like that. But the part of the schedule up front, like Ben said, it will save you time on site and save you money on site. They can keep referring to it, and spend time going through the scope of works with the contractor on site in week one. And you will save time and they'll save time because they go, oh, well, I can get on with that now because I know what I need to do. So in my eyes, the more detailed you do the first one when it comes to a HMO, the easier it becomes to reciprocate that into other projects. So my tweaks now, I don't change any finishes because it's just the same as the last one, but it's just on a different floor plan. So even though it seems really high level detail, I can spend like an hour on it and it's done. So I think detail's still key, even on slightly smaller projects.
Yeah, I think what I would say, and I'm doing myself out of work with this, but it doesn't have to be your architect doing this stuff. If you've got a set of planning drawings with your layouts on, get a felt tip pen out, mark them up. Like that's enough information to remove all ambiguity out of the situation. If you know that you want 6 downlighters in that room, mark them up. Because I guarantee the contractor is just going to assume a pendant light, and that could be the difference between 250 quid in difference. So you don't have to rely on your consultants to do this stuff. Like Jack says, the more you do it, the more templates you'll create, and you can replicate a lot of those things. But in short, I would say the more information, the more details you can give, the less headache you're going to have further down the line. Cool, good question. So procurement, these are the 3 main procurement routes that you're likely to go down. 80% of people will go down the traditional route, less so, probably 15-20% will do the design and build route, and employer's agent, and very, very few people will do the contract management at the smaller scale level. So traditional, just to run through kind of the definitions, traditional is where you are pulling together a full detailed design specification or performance specification, like I've just sort of discussed, and then you go out to competitive tender with that information. So you fully designed everything, and then you're asking a contractor to quote against all of that information. Design and build, you're basically bringing an employer's agent on board, which is a project manager or a sort of QS. You'll have employers' requirements, so it will be a high-level specification of all the sorts of things that you want from this project. It will be the performance type of information, which I mentioned earlier, so what your energy strategy says you need from a thermal perspective. So your walls need to be a U value of 2, your walls need to be a U value of 0.16, you need a boiler that has X performance rating, and all of that information gets pulled together, and a contractor takes more of the risk and basically comes back and says, I can provide that construction based on that package of information for X lump sum. You get less control as the client in that perspective because they are working within that criteria, and they've got a set price within that criteria. to deliver it. But you can get some quite good certainty of cost with that type of contract. The contract management side of things would have been more akin to the types of things we were doing at the Berkeley Group. So much larger schemes, we would be breaking up the design into different elements to then manage individual smaller contracts. So for example, one of my contracts that I managed was the facade package. So quite a big part of the building works, but the details, the architects and the engineers would pull together a package specifically for the facade. We would go out to tender based on that package, and then find the right contractor that's right for us. So essentially, contract management is breaking the project down into individual elements and then project managing and overseeing each contract. Whether you use sort of either one of these three, there are certain things that will have sort of pros and cons within each, but typically they'll all have these sorts of things involved. So you'll be looking at the difference, the speed with a design and build process. I mean, it's so project specific, but essentially all of these routes will have some form of, you'll be looking at the speed in which they can be produced, how much they're going to cost you. With quality, the traditional route is going to give you a higher quality product because you are specifying every single element of it, but it may cost you more, for example. You'll need to look at the project constraints because, for example, a small HMO project is unlikely to work well with a contract management perspective. If you're, unless you're a site foreman or a builder and you've got other individual trades that you can bring in where it's more of an informal type contract. I mean, to be honest, it's just, that would be too small really for sort of contract management side of things. But yeah, speed, cost, quality, project constraints, you'll be looking at the type of risk. So D&B contracts are going to de-risk things slightly from your perspective because they are telling you that they can deliver this scheme and they're contracted to do so within a certain price, within a certain time frame. Asset ownership and financing will also play a part in which route you want to choose. So I know a couple of sort of property developers that are relatively new to developing. A lender is going to have far more comfort if they've got a D&B contract in place, where again there's certainty of cost. They've got one contractor coming in to do the whole lot, and a lender's probably going to be more comfortable with that if you're inexperienced. So what does a good tender process look like? We do a lot of these. Once you've sent all of your information out, or your sort of employer's requirements out, there are a few things for me that flag up what makes a good contractor from a bad contractor, and also things that you should be doing to make things run as smoothly as possible. One of the key things that I find from good contractors that are really on the ball and fully understand the project is that they ask questions. If you've got a contractor that's coming back to you saying, can you just clarify which rooms will have pendant lighting, which rooms will have downlights, if it's not clear, or what is the specific, any questions, I guess, coming back from contractors are going to, for me, suggest that the contractors read and understood the package of information. And also, if the questions he's coming back are glaringly obvious on the package, then he probably hasn't read it in as much detail as he possibly should. So contractors that ask questions are great for your tender process. Always set a tender deadline. Realistically, for small to medium sort of property developments, 3 weeks should be the minimum sort of time frame, and obviously the bigger you go, the longer that process is going to be. If you're going down a design and build route where you've got a couple of different stages of tender, which is possible, then it's obviously going to take a lot longer than that. If you're sending out information and there are addendums to your tender, make sure that it's all sent out to all of the contractors that are tendering for the process. I've seen it too often where one person queries something and then that information isn't spread around to the rest of the contractors, it leaves them in a worse position, leaves you in a worse position, because you're going to be getting information back that isn't like for like. And that's my next point, really, trying to get contractors to give their returns in a standard format. So if you look at the right hand side image, I haven't got all of it on here, but this left hand side column is essentially a breakdown of the scope of works. And what you should be able to do is take a costing from each contractor into every line, so you compare each element of that tender process against each other. It becomes very difficult to really kind of analyze who's better than who, and whose price is actually really robust if you can't do that. Often I'll have underneath my kind of main comparison what I call kind of a regularization of tenders. So I know that the kitchen is going to be £15,000. Each one of them has provided a supply cost for the kitchen. One supplied £10,000, one supplied £20,000, one's gone up to £30,000 for their kitchen. Well, that's no good. There's no point in comparing these totals together if that's what they've included within their main total. So in the regularization section, that's where I'll equalize all of the kitchen costs that the contractors have given, to give a price that's actually fair for everyone. And feedback to them. You're doing them a massive injustice if you don't feed back to them. They often spend a lot of time on these tenders. The sort of least you can do is give feedback on where they maybe fell short, and it's going to strengthen your relationship with the contract as well going forward. So once you've got the contractor, oh, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to interject there, and quite often when you have feedback to them, it makes them more inclined to come back and get a better feel for you on that, maybe that same project or another project. So yeah, so it's key for, I think, growing a relationship with any contractor to make sure you can feedback rather than just ignore them. Yeah,
absolutely. So once you've found the contractor that you want to use, there are various things, various types of contract that you can put in place. The main one and the most common, I mean, to be honest, 90-95% of contracts that I see are of the JCT types, as Joint Contracts Tribunal. But there are various different JCT contracts that you can put in place. There's a full suite of them, and understanding which one's relevant to which project is something that, you know, if you've got a QS on board or your contract administrator can advise on at a very, very high level. I'll break down how I see most of them. So minor works, I would say anything up to about 250 grand would be relevant to this minor works. There is one lower than this within the JCT suite, but it's a homeowner JCT contract, and that is even more sort of, I guess, dumbed down for contracts between homeowners and contractors, builders, where, you know, you've got 7,500 grand's worth of single story extension and some internal works and things like that. But as a developer, you're not going to be using that one. So minor works would be less than 250 grand. An intermediate IC contract will be somewhere between 250 and £1 million range. I mean, this is very sort of high level, and there may be intricacies in your project that mean that these aren't necessarily suitable, but for me at a high level this works. And then you've got the standard building contract for larger projects. Now all of these types of contract have subdivisions of contract. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Design and build contracts, which we've just mentioned, which are a different form and type of contract altogether. But all of these will have different subsections. So predominantly with or without contractor design. So you could have a minor works contract. I mean, take our Seafield Court project, basement conversion to flats, for example. We used a minor works contract with contractor design. And the contracted design element was essentially the boiler, the electrics, and the M&E. And that's normally where they'll come in, like they'll have their own contractors that will specify the design of those things. You'll give them a performance spec or tell them what it needs to hit in terms of ratings, but the actual design will come from them in terms of where the pipe work runs, how the electrics are installed, etc. And then when you get to the larger types of contracts, they will have elements where it could be with quantities. So essentially, you are providing a specification of works. You're giving the contractor the total square footage of tiling, the number of internal doors, and basically any other quantities, and you're spelling it out to them to say that this is what you should include within your quote. There's another one which is approximate quantities, so they'll often come back with schedule of rates for certain things, and then without quantities, so you're basically asking them to do a bill of quantities themselves, takeoffs from the drawings to get linear meters and meter squared rates of all of the different elements that they're putting a price against. So that's very high level overview of the JCT contract suite. They are complicated. The problem that people have is, it's only when things start to go wrong on site that you start to understand the importance of these contracts. So getting someone up front who understands them and understands which one is right for your specific project is very important. So you've got the contractor signed up. You're now looking ahead to see what type of time frame you're going to be looking at. Your contractor said it's going to take me 6-7 months. You've got a definitive time frame, and for me, this is really what is going to drive the delivery of your scheme. One of the first things that I was told at the Berkeley Group is that the program is the most important thing, and you should be constantly reviewing it. So weekly basis, where are we? How are we looking? We're looking ahead. Are there any long lead items that we need to order now in order so that you've got certainty that it's going to be delivered on this date? And even on smaller projects, so this particular project, I think it's just for a 2-story side extension, if I'm honest. And it's very, very high level. You've just got the preliminaries, you've got the groundwork section, the superstructure, fit out and finishes. But even this gives you some clarity and a bit of a sense check to, am I going to bring this in on time? With this one in particular, I've got prices allocated against the various sections, so I can do an estimated cash flow and look ahead at when things are likely going to be needed for payment and to be on site. So for me, the program is the most important thing, and even on small projects, I think it's worth doing. But from as a sort of developer and investor myself, understanding of when all these costs are going to be needed really helps to ensure the cash flow is there and not sort of hold up works on site. So this is kind of very high level one, but I would recommend it on most of the projects that you do. And then you get into the levels of sort of Microsoft. I've forgotten the name of it now.
Gantt Charts.
Gantt Charts, yeah. So it's Microsoft. There are plenty of
Microsoft Project.
Thank you. Microsoft Project, a Gantt chart software where you can have interdependencies on various different elements. So if you know that you've got a critical window that's on a 16-week lead time, and you can't install the flooring until that critical window is installed, you know that you're reliant on that bar essentially not moving because you've got a defined date of when the flooring needs to go down. And if you miss the start date to order those critical windows, you're going to push your program back considerably. So all of these things really help to smooth out the process of project management. And I guarantee any project manager out there, this will be the first thing that they look at every morning, the first thing they discuss with their team. And it will absolutely help you with the delivery of your schemes.
I think this is even more important in times like COVID-19, when there's restrictions on how many people are allowed on site. There's restrictions to what materials you can actually get. There's delays. The contingency of delays is phenomenal. We've had a 3-week delay on just a bath. So I think it's key knowing this, because it's not just what does that 3-week delay do for that bathroom, but what impact does that have elsewhere? So again, like, this is more important than ever, really.
Yeah. And in a time, 2 months ago, finding plaster, for example, was like gold dust. So your foreman or your project manager will be thinking, okay, well, what can I bring forward to help stun the delay in the program, because we can't plaster things. And this type of snapshot in your program will really help to figure out what you can bring forward and what will help you bring things.
Cool. We've got a question in the chat box from Rob. What are your 3 most useful apps/programs that you use to deliver projects?
Yeah, there are a few that we use, I guess. This was actually built in a program called Gantt, and it links in with another one of our project management softwares, which is more of an overarching company project management software, which is called Asana. Asana is probably one of the biggest project management tools that I see people using out there. We've used Trello in the past. There's one called Monday, but we use Asana. We love Asana. Whether it's a project on site that you're dealing with, or it's your business and your company, it's so flexible. And Asana integrates with Gantt. So if you look at this screen, actually, and it says, coordinate structural engineer, appoint party wall surveyor, all of these items are subtasks in our Asana board. And the dates that we assign to that subsection integrates with Gantt to create this kind of chart. So, there's an app for it. The sort of web version obviously is the most powerful version, but the app is equally really, really quick to use. Like with the contract administration that we do for some of our architectural clients, the operative that is on site will have Asana on their phone. They will be speaking to the contractor on site, saying what are the health and safety issues, what are the issues that you've got on site at the moment, what's being delivered, what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. They're on site typing that information into Asana. They're taking photos of what's gone on in terms of progress, and it uploads direct to Asana. So by the time they've got back to the office, I've got somebody back in the office who's putting together a report for my client. So again, just a really efficient way of getting information from site to the client, to the consultants, whilst allowing you to program things. And it has huge amounts of other integrations as well. You can integrate it with Xero, your accounting software. I mean, it's never ending. There seems to be more and more things coming out. And we also use Google Drive. So that has all of our information on it. Everyone within our team can view documents if they need to on site. And it's a collaborative tool where each person can actually be amending the documents on the fly. So yeah, I mean, I would say Google Drive, Asana, Gantt, and they all integrate well with each other. Are probably the best apps that we use. Yeah.
Anyone else on the call got any others to add?
Someone's trying to speak, but they're in a fishbowl.
His photo is a lake, not too far off. Andrew, do you want to type it in the box? Your signal's not great.
Yeah. All the stuff that you're talking about is first order management. None of the tools you discussed are second order management tools. So you don't have anything to manage risk registers. You don't have anything to do with portfolio management.
So risk management can be...
I can't really do that right now. We're offline.
Risk management can be managed on Asana. There's no reason why a task isn't set up for risk, and as operatives are on site and reviewing things, they can add and change and amend. Likewise with Google Drive, it's easy to amend those things on the fly. If you've got a template set up, you can update your risk register as and when.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons, Andrew, that Ben didn't mention any portfolio management tools is because the webinar is specifically focused on delivery. So we do have portfolio management tools which we use also, which may be.
Just to clarify, it's not just to clarify.
Can't hear you, Andrew. Type it in the box and we can come round to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Ben.
So yeah, programming is
about portfolio management and portfolio buildings. I'm talking about the project portfolio management tool. I have used them in the past.
Okay, well, let's come back to that. So yeah, program is really key. I didn't really know where to put these next slides or talk about them, but they are extremely important, and it's Cdn Regulations. I don't know how many of you are fully aware of these. They were brought in 2015. They were always around, but they weren't as sort of rigid and as well used as they are now. They've been brought in to try and stop things like this. I mean, the smaller sites are the worst. You know, builders that have been around for 40 years and are stuck in their ways, have never worn hard hats in their lives, don't understand what high-vis is. They were brought in to try and help smaller sites to become more health and safety conscious and protect everyone, I guess. So if you don't know much about them, I'll get onto that in a minute, but there's generally three parts to the Cdn regulations. There's you as the client, there'll be a principal designer and a principal contractor. I'm not going to go into the detail because I could be here for a while. If you want to know more, there is a blog on my website which kind of breaks it down relatively easily. I can put this in maybe the video feed or something, or share it around afterwards. But if you go to our website, aurahomes.co.uk, there's some information on Cdn regulations. At a very, very high level, the health and safety executive, HSE, need to be notified if you're working on a project that involves this type of number of people or time frame. So if your works are scheduled to last longer than 30 days, and have more than 20 workers working simultaneous at any point, or exceeds 500 person days, then you must notify the HSE with an F10 form to basically say that well, you're notifying them that works is about to commence and that it falls within their act. When you break this down, even on small projects, if you've got 4 builders on site 6 days a week, that's 24 man hours, person days per week. So you're at about 20 weeks with the 500 person days. So 5 months as a project. If you're getting to the sort of 5-6 month mark with your project, the likelihood is you'll probably need to notify HSE. It is a simple form. Anyone can fill it out. There are links within this this blog as well, but CDN regulations are definitely things that people need to be aware of. You as the developer, as the client, do have certain things that you'll need to abide by, so take a look at them. Contract administration. So you've had your contract drawn up, and the next stage is really kind of facilitating that contract. Now, if you've got a contract administrator on board, the person that's pulled together the contract for you, or an employer's agent, that person essentially is the intermediary between the client and the contractor. You won't really have the contractor, or you shouldn't really have the contractor going direct to the client for changes and variations. It should be via the contract administrator, because they are the ones that need to be notified, and we'll draw up all of the relevant certificates of payment and variations, etc. The contract administrator or the employer's agent will work closely with your lender as well. So there'll be a monitoring surveyor that your lender will be sending to site, once a month. The contract administrator will send them all of the relevant operation manuals, the valuation certificates, site reports, any planning conditions that need discharging, any warranties, etc. And we'll all need to go to the monitoring surveyor so that the lender can sign off the relevant payments to be sent to the client to pay the contractor. So the contract administrator really is kind of the middleman for all of this. Their job is essentially to monitor the quality of the works that are being complete, check that what's being done on site has been done correctly and as per the detailed design and specification. They'll issue payment certificates based on the works complete. So if the contractor says he's done X, Y, and Z, but the contract administrator turns up on site and he's only done X and Y, well, the contractor's only going to get paid for X and Y, and that's his role as intermediary. He'll also run any variations. So we've saved one of our clients a significant amount of money on one of his projects recently, where the contractor was very savvy and didn't necessarily, and it was used to working directly with clients where there isn't a contract administrator involved, there isn't a QS involved. And every single change on site, everything that they deemed as an unforeseen, they would come back with an extremely hefty variation of cost. So, oh, we didn't expect this this foundation to be underpinned. Our rates for this are £6,000. Well, when you've got a contract administrator on board and a QS that can oversee that, they know what they're looking at, and they can push back on that contractor to say, well, those rates are ridiculous. Realistically, this is £2,500 worth of work. We're not paying you £6,000, and you'll negotiate a more realistic cost. Without that contract administrator or QS involved, a homeowner, for example, doesn't know what they're looking at. The contractor saying it's going to cost £6,000. More often than not, they'll probably just say, oh God, that's a lot of money. Okay, well, if it needs to be paid, it needs to be paid. So the role of the contract administrator is to oversee all of those variations and make sure that they're fair on both client and contractor. RFIs, essentially requests for information. So if the contractor does need more information, doesn't have the right level of detail, then they'll go to the contract administrator to find out more, and they will then relay that to the various consultants that can give them the relevant information. This is what an interim certificate looks like. So once a contract administrator has been on site and checked some of the works that have been completed, the contractor will be invoicing them a certain amount, and the contract administrator will have to provide a certificate to value those works. Within all of those contracts, JCT contracts that I mentioned earlier, there'll be some form of retention payment. Typically, it's about 5%. So what you're doing in each of these certificates throughout the project, so every month, say you're drawing up one of these certificates, every payment will have 5% deducted from that certificate. So that at the very end, you've got a retained amount that the contractor doesn't get paid for until he's finished off the work and done all of the relevant snagging, which I think I'm about to go on to. Yeah. So handover, once the works have been complete, you've delivered it successfully, you're happy, your contractor has created your 6-unit scheme successfully, he's done all the landscaping and all the works are complete. You will have what's called practical completion. Now, this is the point at which the defects liability will start. So you're basically saying to the contractor, we agree that you have completed the terms of the contract, you have finished your works on this date. Within the contract, there is a 3, 6, 9, 12-month defects period. This is the date at which that defects period starts. Leading up to practical completion, there are 2 types of defects. There's patent defects, and there's latent defects. Patent defects are essentially things that you have foreseen, you can see before practical completion. So if there's clearly some I don't know, paintwork missing on one of the walls, that we're not going to get to practical completion until that's finished. That's a patent defect that needs to be rectified before practical completion is accepted. And then latent defects are things that appear further down the line. So cracks within staircases, structural cracks that only appear after 2 months, and that's the sort of stuff that if something's not working with some of the electrical switches or sockets, that's a latent defect that needs to be sorted and fixed within the defects period. So as I mentioned, that's what they call sort of snagging. So during the practical completion period, there'll be, depending on what the contract says, 12 months of snagging. So any issues that arise after practical completion need to be rectified by the contractor, all the way up to final account, which is the end date, the 12 months after practical completion, for example, where the final account is drawn up. So any deductions from the contract, so if they haven't rectified any issues that you think they should have rectified, there's likely to be some deductions from the final contract value. And that's exactly what the retention is there for, to protect you as the client, to make sure that there's an incentive for the contractor to finish all of those defects. Just something to be aware of as you go through the kind of delivery process. Keep on top of your contractor and your consultants to pull together the operations and maintenance manuals and the health and safety file. We find it sort of beneficial to essentially have a checklist of all the things you would expect to see. Things like this on the right hand side. So all of your drawing packages from your structural engineers, your architects, any warranties. So we've got Delta tanking warranties that we needed, guarantees and warranties for the windows, boiler underfloor heating. We've got the final completion certificate from building control. We had to undertake a BREEAM assessment on this project, so we've got our report from the BREEAM assessment. So anything that is relevant to the ongoing use of the property. This is a legal requirement, and it's often not it's not done as well as it should be, really. But all of this information will help any future home buyer potentially solve any issues or have the history of the site to look back on if there are any issues. And that's it, really. Whistle-stop tour of sort of project management and how projects should be set up after you've got planning, all the way through from detailed design for the procurement, the tender, looking at forms of contracts, how important programming can be, and the contract administration process. So happy to take any questions.
I'm sure anyone can unmute and fire some questions away if you have any. Obviously, we could have spent a lot longer on each slide and page.
No questions? Good. Happy days. Right. Next.
It means Ben answered everything everyone wanted to know.
There you go.
I was going to say, Ben and Jack, a number of times I'll go into a new build that's being handed over to put together a maintenance package. Do you insist, for example, on certification from the sparks, benchmark certificates for the cylinder and the boiler, etc., and put them into the O&Ms?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time they'll say, "Oh, we've left them in the kitchen drawer, or we've left them." Okay, fine. Yeah, you've kind of given them to us, but you know, we want them scanned in and digitally repurposed so that we can get them in a Dropbox for anyone to download at a later date, really. But yeah, I mean, your electrician should be giving you NIC, EIC certificates. You should have a gas safety certificate. If you've got gas boilers being installed, you need them certified and signed off. You know, you're not going to get sign off from your building control officer until you've provided that information anyway.
I was going to say, even I follow some quite high-end buildings as well, and often things get overlooked, particularly unvented cylinders and boilers. Benchmark certificates, which should be completed by the installer, handed over, building control notified. Yeah. And also the unvented cylinders, more often than not, and I'm not suggesting you don't know this, by the way, a lot of developers are blissfully unaware that the installer needs to be suitably qualified for that. They're like an exploding vessel if they're badly installed.
Yeah, I've actually seen some builders pay, snag the build, pay the full retention and final fee, and then they haven't got building control sign off, they haven't got any certs, and you're completely screwed because there's no motivation for that builder to come back and finalise everything. So it's the whole point of the, exactly like you say, making sure you've got everything in place first before the contractors fully signed off and got their final retention fee.
Yeah, I tend to use these things as a carrot, I guess, rather than a stick. But they're not going to get paid until they've provided these pieces of information. So it's in their interest. There's a question or a comment really about snagging issues at the end. Yeah, contractors aren't always happy to come back. If the retention is big enough, then they should be motivated to come back and sort out issues. But sometimes they cut their losses, and the contract that's why the retention is there. So if there's £5 left in the retention that the contractor's not coming back to fix, the client's then got that £5,000 to use to bring someone else in to rectify issues.
Yeah, good point, Tony.
I've got a question. I've got a question around sort of when a small project tips over into these kind of realms. I suppose it goes back to the HMO question earlier on about when does a project get big enough that you need to put some of these things in place. So if you were taking like a buy-to-let, a resi refurb, just putting in a new bathroom, kitchen, maybe rewiring.
Yeah.
Presumably you need to be organised and have a plan about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Not necessarily all of this stuff, but when you're starting to do things like, windows or replastering or whatever, I'm just wondering what the tipping point is at which it makes sense to put all this stuff in place.
I would say the premise of all of this stuff in some shape or form will be done in a lot of those smaller projects anyway. You don't have to have records of everything in terms of Gantt charts and full detailed specification of works, but the more you do of the sort of small buy-to-lets and HMOs, like we were saying earlier, the more templated these things can become. But yeah, to be honest, smaller projects are normally the ones that have bigger issues, because people don't. There's no scale in. When I'm looking at sort of an architectural fee, smaller projects for me often come with bigger headaches because there's no budget allowance for health and safety. There's no budget allowance for the correct management of things, and that's part of the reasons why the Cdn regulations were sort of brought in for smaller projects. I kind of agree that the smaller you go, the more difficult it is to manage, because there's no money in it to have that level of management. And that's often when you start getting to bigger projects, you'll have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 main contractors. You're going to be paying more for your tier 1 management, tier 1 contractor, because they've got all of these extra elements of health and safety and management. Like if I went on to a Berkeley Group scheme, if I went back to that project, the health and safety is number one on any agenda that we talk about. There's budget for it, there's banksmans, there's security guards, there's people out on site that are just there to kind of just walk around and oversee and check things, there's boards up everywhere, there's walkways specifically to take you through the site. It's so much easier at that level to have bigger budget in play for health and safety and management. The smaller you go, the bigger percentage of your kind of contract value that becomes, and it just becomes unfeasible. I prefer slightly larger projects than I do sort of the nitty-gritty small HMOs and sort of small extensions, because the expectations are still there. There's just no budget.
Could you go through what happens after practical completion, in terms of the proper procedure for retention? I mean, I'm quite surprised to hear that you're not closing out for a year. I would imagine most would hear that it's like times longer than I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I've sort of said 3, 6, 12 months. It really does depend on the size of the project. It's not uncommon to have a 12-month defects period. For smaller projects, 3 to 6 months is pretty typical. Like if I was doing one of my sort of private homeowner clients who's remodeling their home, 6 months would be pretty standard. But during that time, so we've got a final visit on Friday with one of our projects in Willesden Green. We've given a long list of final snagging items to the contractor. There's always back and forth between that period. It's you saying this isn't done to standard. The contractor says, well, show me where the standard is dictated, and it can often be a negotiation really to sort of say, well, it's clearly pretty shoddy workmanship, but we can't really prove what it needs to be, but we need to come to some sort of...
Is that done in a single way? Normally when I've been on site, then you go around and do a snagging list. Action is normally pretty quick after that. It's a matter of a few weeks. Are you retaining the entire retentions budget, issuing 80%?
Well, I mean, the whole point of the snagging process is that you're giving things long enough for defects to become apparent. There's no point in having a 2-week defects period if the boiler pump fails within the 4th week, because you're then not covered. If it's poor workmanship that's caused that pump to fail, you need to have a long enough period of time that these defects become apparent.
Yeah, we've recently finished a 5-bed house in Buckinghamshire. The client bought it before the floor finishes were down, and so it's technically speaking to some degree off plan, if you'd like to call it that way, Andrew. And there was a settlement snagging agreement that in 12 months' time we'd re-snag, and if there's any movement or cracks, any of the oak, because there was quite a bit of oak work in it, twisting a lot or cracking a lot, it could be readdressed, and that was a 12-month period.
Yeah, I understand that, but there's also a lot of snagging work typically which is done on quite a short-term basis. So, for example, you get practical completion, you go around and you say, okay, well, the building's practically complete, but we've got, for example, a rattly door on floor 2, okay? And then that, along with 150 other faults, will be given to the contractor on the day of practical completion or soon after, as an initial snag list. The question is, if you've got... Sorry?
We agree with you. The majority of your snagging is done on PC. That's correct. He's gone. He's gone to snag a project.
Yeah, I mean, with that, houses move, in different temperatures, hot and cold. It goes through different cycles. You are going to get movement. You're going to get hairline cracks. You're going to get things that need to be patched up. So, most of the snagging will be done within the first couple of weeks because you identify the bits that need to be rectified. But there will be lots of things that just aren't apparent that early on.
Yeah, I understand that. My question was about the retention process. So when the contractor's done their initial round of snagging, do you release most of the retention payment, or do you hold the whole lot back until the end of the defects warranty period?
So if you've got a 5% retention payment, 2.5% of that is generally released on PC. And then 2.5% is retained until the end of that 3, 6, 12-month period, whatever the contract says. Cool. Any other final questions? No? Cool, good stuff. So thanks for listening, everyone. We've just got a few more bits to run through, which Saul's going to take us through.
Yeah, obviously we've done quite a few events, so we'll give you a little bit of a breather. Our next one's going to be in October, and that'll be looking at the sales and marketing side of things. So keep an eye out for the date, which will be announced in the coming weeks.
You should get an email as you've already been part of this event. But if you haven't seen that, we'll push it all over Facebook and LinkedIn as normally.
Yeah, and we've now got 8 people signed up for the monthly boardroom sessions that we're going to start in September. So if you're interested in getting involved in
I'm fine,
accountability
thank you.
session, really. Sorry, someone spoke.
Louise, I think, is just taking a phone call.
All right. Yeah, so if anyone wants to get involved in those types of accountability sessions, be an afternoon every month, looking at the needs and needs of the group and trying to push our businesses forward.
And finally, we pulled together a document which is hopefully in aid of how people may be able to partnership with our business. There's many ways that we could work with people out there listening. We do joint venture work with invest, vice versa. Help people with projects, people help with us with projects. We find people projects and vice versa. So we thought we'd build a bit more of a formal document that you can review and really have a think about how that may look on paper, because there's all these formalities, but I never see anyone else JVing until the deal's there. But how do you know what each other are looking for? So we got this document built together. If you want to flick through it, just let me know. It's free. We just pretty much wrote it up so you could just have a bit of a scan through and a bit of light reading. And if you think it's a good read and you enjoy reading it, and that's it, no worries. But if you have any other questions, we're happy to set up a time to call.
Are you able to email out the links and resources for the stuff that you've discussed today? I mean, I'm particularly interested in the accountability group, and I'm not in a position to take down the details right now, but if you can send them out to me and all the other attendees, I'm sure we'll get some more interest.
Yeah, sure. So Tony's just requested the doc as well. We can share out all these details with all the parties.
So yeah, next webinar in October about the sales and marketing process. With boardroom session, we'll send out information via email to the attendees as well as the EXP partnership program. And if anyone wants to chat about anything, please do get in touch. That's our sort of personal details. You can find us all over social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'd love to touch base with you all. And if you've got any questions about today's content, then just get in touch. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for everyone joining.
Cheers, everyone. Bye now.
Cheers, guys.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers, Tony.